Hello, users. So, tonight's talk I wanted to talk about Star Wars, and I was listening to a piece from Urban Acolyte, which I already answered, but it raised a topic about, at the end, this um, these pulling fan bases, or one advocating less Jedis within the mythos or the story, and one other side advocating for a larger Jedi Sith basin within the story. So, to put it simply, a scenario like Star Wars A New Hope 4, 5, 6, or a scenario like Star Wars 1, 2, 3. Um, and So this is, I think, an old school debate as well, which I wouldn't reopen, but I wanted to trace some of the origins of this discussion and where it actually comes from, which actually is a discussion on the how the Star Wars lore has built on, um, and why certain lore is being referred to more than other. Um, and not only just for quality reasons, but so to cut the story in short, and I'm not sure if this video will come out well because I'm streaming live. So if it doesn't, I'll do it again, not live, and I'll add some images which should help to go and hunt down all the media that was used and through which Star Wars has evolved the mythos that or the lore that we're now using for it. And this is more specifically about the lore that is being used and why it's being used. But just to cut to the chase, so Star Wars had, and some of us, the older ones, the ones who saw it when it was out, may remember a whole series of comics that came out following the stories of the Star Wars heroes. And I think some of those stories were actually collected recently in the bundles that were sold from Dark Horse, and it was called Droids, I think, collecting some of the stories, mostly of R2D2 and C3PO. Um, but the reason this lore isn't particularly used is because it's obviously um, propagated towards the future of the heroes from the Star Wars, from A New Hope onwards. Of course, for the small parenthesis or tangent, as with other similar products, this product also suffered greatly because some of these things were produced in between the movies, and they designed plot lines or storylines that would not work with the later movies. And I'm not talking about the 1, 2, 3, I'm still talking about 5 and 6. So some of that automatically just went in obsoleteness in the forgetting room just because it didn't fit anymore with. And there's some on YouTube. There's some um, different stories and that had been written directly also for the movies as well. So that's another example. Or if you've just to get another tangent, which is always interesting, if you've ever read any of the Alien comics between 2 and 3, there is a huge plot line, also very interesting, that goes and explores what Newt becomes after Alien 2, because of course in the comic she doesn't die, they wake up and she has all her life and they go on, etc. And there is, I like that plot line very much, but of course when Alien 3 came out and Newt had died in the stasis chamber, or what you want to call it, all of that went to rubbish, and it's quite hard to find any of that mythos anymore because it's not. It tends to be redacted from bundles and stuff. So This is about the droids comic, as it's been called by Dark Horse. I don't know who produced it at the time, by the way, but it's irrelevant. What is relevant is that sometimes at the beginning of the 90s, as it became popular, mostly I remember through Dune and also through an emerging or the beginning of the emerging of geekdom and the growing popularity maybe of books like Tolkien and stuff like that at school. A whole narrative genre came first from Dune, and then a lot of Star Wars books came, and I never read any of those. But from those plot lines came a whole series of comic books in the mid 90s. We're talking 92, 93, 94, and we are looking, the image that you're looking at now is one of those comics, and it's a whole story arc that evolves. I think it starts, no, it doesn't start with Jedi Master arc. It starts with two young men, brother and sister, you see in this very image. Um, and it just keep it very broad. It instead of telling the story of Jedi's and the Force in Luke's time, it decides to talk about that's 2,000 or 3,000 years before Luke Skywalker. I think I'm not even I don't know, but it starts plotting this idea that had been somehow narrated in not narrated but talked about by Obi-Wan and just simply m- slightly mentioned during the first three movies that gave this idea of a past where the Jedi were a lot and the better times, as Obi-Wan puts it with his lightsaber. And so this comic and this comic series starts exploring uh, th- the past of this galaxy, and it comes out with a comic that's also very well known that introduces Xizor with Princess Leia, and it's an intermediate to, I'm not sure if between 3 and 4 or 5 or 4 and 5, but um, no, 4, 5, 6. Anyways, yeah, you get it. Going back to this story arc, um, it started drawing the picture of the galaxy in its ancient past. So, and that's where it sort of all began from there, because it also starts um, putting some of the bases for the notion of the Mandalorian Wars, which is explored. Well, not the Mandalorian Wars. The Mandalorians is a notion that is explored in this story arc through Exar Kun, and that is later picked up by the KOTOR series, which we're about to talk about, in with the Mandalorian war plotline that sort of follows not immediately after, but more or less within this time period. So, and going back, it's a video game. I think it's from 1998, and the following is I don't know when KOTOR 2 is from, but it's also in this ancient past, a bit later, following the period of these comics, but it makes a huge reference of all the material in the comics, beginning with Exar Kun and Nar Sadao and um, something Crash. I don't remember the name of all the Sith Lords, sorry. Um, but so KOTOR is aware of this context and narrative, and places its video game within this specific time frame of the 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 Jedi history, the Jedi galaxy, the whatever you want to call it. And the game has a lot of following, and it's not like it's the only game out there about Star Wars in that period. We also have a whole series of video games about a character called Kyle Katarn, which is a Jedi, and however, that is after A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and all of that. So of course it does suffer the same problem as any other movie that has been done before any continuation has been done. So it doesn't know where the official story will go. And Kal Katarn, being part of the future of Star Wars, and being that less unsure is whether it has a fandom or not. Um, he just has had less success and less impact on Star Wars and popular culture than Revan, which is one of the major characters. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't played it, from the KOTOR series, um, which together with this Tales of the Jedi series from Dark Horse is other than one of the first to explore and start giving also visual image of the ancient Jedi galaxy. Um, and it is, and as I said, this Star Wars Tales of the Jedi came around in the mid 90s, so it came before um, the new Star Wars. I think it came even earlier than the first CGI version of the old movies. So it really did explore this possibility of a Jedi galaxy with many Jedi and a big Jedi Academy and maybe Sith in an equivalent position, which was of course totally opposite to the situation in A New Hope and those movies. Which had, of course, a more mythological structure. But that's briefly saying that's what Star Wars gave. It gave us a whole new world, a whole new mythos, and on the contrary of, um, let's say, Tolkien's world mythos, which is, of course, and which provides us with a playground that is limited within its context. Star Wars, being set in the future and being set in a context of infinite technological possibilities and also somehow mystical possibilities, is a mythos, is a context in which all kinds of stories can be told. And while you might have read some tacky story about zombies in the Star Wars universe, and you might not count it as one of the best zombie stories you've ever read, it still demonstrates somehow that Star Wars is a context in which all sorts and manners of stories can be told and explored. And this is surely, I mean, this world with many Jedi and many Sith is surely one of the most successful explorations of the Star Wars context that has had a huge following. In fact, KOTOR and KOTOR 2 are now followed in their plot line by SWTOR, which has, of course, a following. And there's people on YouTube saying that the guy who did Clone Wars, whose name I can't remember. I'm sorry. And who was on Star Wars Rebels and who isn't anymore because he's going to do an animated movie on the Old Republic. Let's just put it in terms without explaining it. So, and that would be, according to whoever says it on YouTube, to sort of justify and feed that fandom, which is represented now by SWTOR players, and that is embodies this vision or this part of the Star Wars mythos where we have a lot of Jedi and a lot of Sith. And just to finish, but to add an additional point, this whole thing, this whole idea wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't so bad that George Lucas had already thought of it as a background story that could be cool, and in fact, apparently from what he says, he had already written it anyway that way, and he then decided that he wanted to start from 4 because of budget reasons, and you know the rest. So apparently he had already, and there are traces of this notion of a galaxy, of which Obi-Wan speaks to Luke, of better times, and we're not specifically told about more Jedi, not that I remember in the old story, but it's sort of implicit that they had a bigger role and function within the galaxy, and thus that they were more, which sort of makes it cooler because it makes it more plausible. I mean, in this context of, I mean, from my point of view, New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back and Return, um, the perception of Jedi is a very singular one. I mean, we have 2, 3 Jedi, not Jedi, Force fine um, people, souls, whatever, in the whole universe. Yes, we get to know at some point that even Leia is, and then we get to know this midget Yoda. Uh, but it gives you this impression of being a very singular state, and since the Star Wars mythos is made for you to drop into the shoes of the hero, it's hard to do this if the hero is a very singular hero. It's very similar to Greek structure of mythology where only the worthy have access to the greater goods or the paradise of the gods, and while everybody else goes to hell, which is um, catered towards sponsoring an aristocratic society. So, and Star Wars does not have this underlying message. It's a message the underlying message is that of the means, of how you do it, of the cause. And the cause is something that everybody can embrace. So you can join the fight if you embrace the cause. It's inclusive. It's inclusive beyond your social state or your capacity. In fact, Star Wars does put a great emphasis in all its movies on the pathos, the how much the character believes in his cause, and just about Rogue One, if anyways. So so what? I don't know. So let me have a drink. So George Lucas, anyways, other than having already somehow traced the idea at the very beginning of a galaxy, well, a Jedi galaxy, a Star Wars galaxy, with more Jedi and more Sith than he had depicted in his first 3 movies. He also liked the idea so much, having seen it explored, that he decided to make the later 3 movies, or the first 3 movies, if you want to see it chronologically, as a good opportunity to tell a story within that context. Of course, you can't do it 1,000 years ago. With respect to Luke Skywalker, he does it 30, and I think it works. I mean, we all didn't like Jar Jar Binks, and all of that, but looking back, I actually miss the idea of having this theater for storytelling, mostly because I'm not sure if I'm just looking back at the newer 3 movies from Lucas and enjoying them more because of what is happening to Star Wars now, or and I must say that I never ever said I didn't enjoy 3, Revenge of the Sith, um, but other than what the movies was, a whole new culture from comics and stories derived from this new depiction of Star Wars, and it created a whole new culture around Star Wars that I found much more vibrant and interesting, also from a narrative point of view, than the scene that was more concentrated on the retro Star Wars. And I don't want to say anything bad about the people who are more interested into retro and into having that, recreating that very look and very. But that's not what a director should be doing. He should be creating new culture. He shouldn't be emulating old culture. And J.J. Abrams has already demonstrated that he's perfectly learned all the lessons of Tarantino, so he's really, really good at making citations and Easter eggs and whole things like that. But then he has a problem tying things together. I mean, if I don't want to talk about Lost too much, but if you've watched it and if you haven't, or even if you care, or even if you don't, the, there one thing has to be said, and if you tell a story about people who are on a lost island and they can't get off it, so they are marginated from the normality of society, and among these people you place two people that are named Locke and Rousseau. Now I'm going to say it because maybe some people are young and they don't know it, but Rousseau is a man, a philosopher, who wrote a book called um, well, Lemino, okay, but Patto Sociale, the social contract, and which is basically an imagining of when men at the beginning of society had to sort of start agreeing to rules and become society. It's a philosophical discussion, and the other guy is Locke. He is also a philosopher, historian, and he's also known for being for having inspired the British and also the American constitutions. Well, the British don't have a constitution, but not namely, but Locke also talks about the creation of society. His metaphor is more through a discussion made between father and son, and what the duties of one are and what the duties of the other are, because both have duties, and that is exactly the point of his discussion. So if you're telling a story about people on an island and you place two people with these names, there is no denying whatsoever under the sun that those are the arguments that you are actually touching. However, you then get to see a very long series of successive seasons, because what I've already said is pertinent and apparent to you already within the first or third episode, once you've met these characters and they're there and their name is there and their name says everything that has to be said. So it's not as if that says anything else. But we have another 6 or 7 seasons where we are scattered with plot lines and Easter eggs and ideas and notions and citations and quotations that make you think that there is actually something else beyond this whole thing that is being told, and the truth is that he doesn't have a bigger picture. So he doesn't know how to put all these ideas together, which isn't in itself something bad. I mean, we all don't have an answer. We don't all have a unitary vision of what to do with all the knowledge that we have. We don't always have an answer, and even Gilgamesh says it. I mean, you can lose and then win anyways by learning something positive. But there is nothing to be learned in this voyage that we've done with J.J. Abrams in Lost. Not particularly pertinent to the things that he's tried to touch. Um, so, and I don't know, for example, because I suppose it's useful to use an example if I say these things, but why place an Egyptian statue on this island and other elements of ancient cultures if you eventually don't specifically and explicitly explain the nature of this island? Um, and if you leave it within mystery, we are provided with all a series of very complex plot lines that seem like they could be very intricate concepts um, that could bring to some ideas. I mean, why do we have these ancient Egyptian statues within this cave in Lost at some point? And some people pointed, and there was, I had seen some videos showing some some old movies from the 30s. I think about Sinbad and him ending on an island where there was um, a statue or a foot uh, of a giant statue, and that this was referred into Lost, so that this was the same island which Sinbad had met at some point. And there are other analogies within Greek and ancient culture that are made. But then there is no answer at the end of this series that specifically addresses this notion. Why is this island ancient? Who has made it? Why does it do what is done on this island? No, we just have this thing that after they all die, they all go together in the same paradise and they stay together. And I'm sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. But if you followed me on this until now, um, anyways, sorry for the spoiler alert. What I mean to say is that J.J. Abrams doesn't have isn't particularly, or as far as I've seen, he isn't particularly swift at putting all the dots together and giving you this perception of a story that has gone somewhere. But going back to this perception of a Sith and Many Jedi inhabited galaxy, George Lucas himself has found it an interesting venue to continue the grand narrative, in his sense, which by itself makes it worthy. But as I was saying, um, there's been a whole new culture of Star Wars growing around um, the Old Republic notion, the perception, and after that, with the new three movies that Lucas made, uh, this culture of a Star Wars galaxy culture. I'm not saying culture with a big capital C, just but this culture of Star Wars with multiple Jedi and Sith um, expanded even to all the stories of of the marginal stories to the main plot line in Revenge of the Sith and so on. And if you've read any of the stories, some are not so interesting and some are good from all that plot line. Many are fond of Star Wars legacy. I'm not talking about canon. I'm talking about um, Darth Krayt and what happens all in that story arc a long time after Luke Skywalker, I suppose, and it follows his grandson. I don't remember. Anyway, the bad guy from this, well, spoiler alert. But go look at Darth Krayt, and if you don't want to hear it, just stop it. Anyways, Darth Krayt, which is the big bad guy of this future, some 200 years after Skywalker, was actually at some point we learn a Jedi before at Obi-Wan's times, let's call it, and Anakin's times. And there's a comic that actually goes and explores this character, and I think it was actually done before the successive story arc, or they picked him. Anyway, this is a Jedi who doesn't live with the Jedi, and he's lived with the Sand People, the Tuscans. So the comic is quite cool. It explores all the Tuscans, and it has a very anthropologic touch to how these people live in the sand. So it's done well, and the Jedi has a very nice touch to to a different interpretation of the Force that is somehow similar with this notion of clan and tribes and oral culture and nomadic culture that somehow the Tuscans represent in Star Wars mythos. Or if you've read any of the oh, his name is slips my thoughts. I'm talking about the guy Voss, Quinlan Voss. Thank you very much. So I don't have to spoil anything for you. The Quinlan Voss story arc is also very interesting, I find. It's if you haven't read it, it's about one of a Jedi who's tasked with trying to find Palpatine. Of course, he doesn't know it's Palpatine, but and he goes undercover. So I'm not going to go into the consequences. What I'm going to say is that his character has at some point even been used in the Clone Wars, side to side by Obi-Wan, even as a child. And so it's one of the only episodes, even I think, about Obi-Wan's. It's one of the only real um, movies or pictures we have about Obi-Wan's youth, and there's Quinlan Vos. But Quinlan Vos was also then followed in the arc that in a book that I suppose is canon that should give closure to Asajj Ventress, and I'm not going to ruin that for you anyways. Um, so, and I was really fond of the Quinlan Voss story arc, not all of it because it's very vast and it covers a lot of comics and it's hard to gather all the material, and not all of the material is particularly inspired, but some of the story arcs are particularly cool, so that's nice, and Quinlan Voss is a particularly cool Jedi. Um, so what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that from both Tales of the Jedi and KOTOR, and from the later three movies from George Lucas, we've had a whole culture of video games and comics that expanded the Star Wars universe in this direction, and some of them are really worth it. Of course, some of them are not, but I mean, you'll always find crap everywhere, even in Golden City. So, don't dismiss the notion of multiple Jedi Sith users in the mythos. Just because you have a very fond memory of the first three movies. I think the first three movies are unrepeatable, simply. So, and I think J.J. Abrams has showed that in The Force Awakens. I mean, as much as, and I'm not particularly fond of all his movies, but I did watch all of Lost and enjoyed it until, yeah, until is the right word, the last episode, and I sort of liked Cloverfield. That when I saw Star Wars, Star Trek, I found it interesting. I didn't mind it. I liked it. Not so much for Star Wars. So, but I'm not particularly averse to him. What I find that I'm starting to believe even more is that The Force Awakens just simply shows how the idea of a galaxy with just one family of Force users is exhausted. I mean, I'm not going to say it's boring because I do like the first three movies, but it's old and it's been explored, and I don't find it as interesting as what has derived since into Star Wars, namely also the later three movies, KOTOR, these comics I'm talking about, and so this vision of a wider galaxy with more actors or Force users. But and I find that is much more interesting. It might not be particularly pertinent to the structure of mythology as the first three movies were done, and I am not sure, and because I've never heard George Lucas say anything on regards, but I don't think that he has given the same weight to the narrative structure in the later three movies than he did in the first three. Uh, Intended in easier words, he has mentioned very often his interest in mythology as in his interest of the underlying and basic um, commune issues of daily life of mythology. This is important because it's the very distinction between mythology and religion, which is a very thin difference, but in this case it's expressed in its totality, as in religion uses certain lessons to express other notions which are usually catered towards either being the glue of rules or the advantage of a social class. So I don't want to talk about or discredit or denigrate major religions nor others, but I will make a more simpler, more ancient example of how in Mesoamerica the rise of a sacerdotale, of a religious caste, uh, which went together with astrological and mathematical knowledge, which the Aztecs were very fond of, resulted later in the consolidation of the aristocratic class in that society. So in one case, religion can either be totally focused on providing power to a certain group of people and consolidating it or maintaining it, or it can be simply a more social instrument, simply as glue for society, providing the rules and the incentives to respect these rules, but these rules are mostly and actually always catered towards making the kind of society in which that religion is work. So it's hard to find a religion that will work against the direction in which the society is going, and I will say more about it to be specific, so I'm not going to be uh, random about it. But if we talk about, for example, the role of Dionysus, and his philosophical role in ancient Greek mentality and philosophy. He is the very opposition of logic, civilization, and man. Um, the example is that, and I have to be specific about it, but um, the rites of Dionysus were rites that included, when they say it generically, they simply say that it left you to the savagerie of life and embraced the wildest um, tendencies of man, bringing him back into nature and away from the city, which is the exact vocabulary used by the Greeks, where city is the place of humanity, civilization. Um, so you see how it is important, anyways, going back to what we were saying, that religion talks about the rules to keep everything together. Mythology, on the other hand, which is what we're talking about, specifically addresses personal issues and provides keys of interpretation, individual keys of interpretation to the reader for life through experience. And it's cabled towards making you understand certain lessons. So, on the other hand, religion is not cabled towards making you learn certain lessons. It's cabled towards making you respect certain rules. So, how does this bring us back to Star Wars? Well, to begin with, of course, what we were saying is that the old movies are particularly focused on using this structure. George Lucas says he is interested in mythology and in the problems that have always touched us as humans, and those problems that touch all of us, and not just a few or a couple or many, or just all of us, and to see if the problems that mythology addressed were problems that were still pertinent today. And he says that he thinks he's demonstrated that they are. So, what I'm saying is that the later three movies surely, or most probably, did not have the same focus. I'm not saying they didn't, but because I don't know, but I doubt, and in their structure, that there is less rituality in and repetitiveness in the actions than, for example, there is in A New Hope. I would like to find an example for this, and I have with me Gilgamesh, but it's in Italian, so that's no good. But mythology has a redundant structure that, if you've ever read original text in mythology, you will notice that just like in fairy tales, there is this tendency, almost like there is in Greek tragedy, to accompany with choirs. In mythology, there is this tendency of repetitiveness, of redundancy of certain notions, of repeating them, of yeah, just there's no other way of putting it. So, and this doesn't only happen with the narrative, it also happens with the notions being presented. So sometimes while you're saying, yeah, well, the story about Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu and them having to go into the forest and meeting this lion, which has wings and has a tail like a scorpion. Wow, I've read something that fantasy about that. That's cool, man. And what does he? Oh, he turns them into stone. Wow, like the thing in ancient Greece. But this is early. Yeah. Okay, so I like this Gilgamesh. It's cool. I mean, the story, the content, it's really cool. But man, it's written like shit. That's what you say when you read Gilgamesh. Okay, so and Star Wars: A New Hope is not written like shit. I mean, it's just that once you've seen it once or twice, and as a kid I've seen it a lot of times, so take me for my word. Um, the repetitive capacity of A New Hope and company is limited somehow, because that narrative is specific, and I'll explain what I'm saying. This is an underlying structure of contemporary Hollywood productions, and it is George Lucas's fault, unfortunately, but he didn't do it as they do it. And the point is that The structure that George Lucas has uncovered for everybody to use is a structure that understands um, the attractiveness of mythology. The attractiveness of mythology is the use of an empty shell as the main um, vector of the ideas being represented. So, yeah, un momento, 1 minute please. Being the main vector of the idea represented, well, okay, I'll just start over. The point is that mythology in itself is a vector for every reader, so that certain lessons can be expanded to all humanity. I've said it elsewhere, and Lucas also expresses somehow an interest in oral culture and how oral culture um, passes on information. So the elementary structure of mythology is one that is made for you to enter the shoes of the hero. And I've talked about this with friends, and it seems that women have a different perception than men, at least from my social context. But a lot of narrative for men is centered around the notion of finding yourselves in the shoes of, through the notion of empathy, through uh, in Italian it's called immedesimarsi, and I'm sure there is an English equivalent, but it's just not there for me at the moment, so you'll forgive me if I try to express myself differently. But what I do when I read usually, and what I find that narrative gives to me, is the transmission of others people's lessons um, through their experience, through their transcript of this experience. The way I do this, of course, is I see myself in their situation, and I try and picture my daily life or my reality as their reality. It's a process that goes through empathy. Um, I'm not going to say what, because I don't know, and I haven't been told. I've just been told that women that don't see empathy and putting in yourself in the shoes of somebody else as the main and principal instrument through which they understand narrative. But what I'm saying is that mythology is certainly cabled towards saying things in this manner, teaching things in this manner, because it has to be told to the most simple of people. We're talking about 4,000 years ago, and even more. So try teaching a lesson to somebody who not only doesn't want to learn it, but does not have the means to learn it in no way possible. So mythology is by definition a type of fairy tale that is made for you to jump into, to imagine yourself as the hero. So while A New Hope and Company is profoundly an individual story, George Lucas says that it's about the Skywalker family, it's about personal problems and lives, and yes, he does want to know what are those problems that we all have, but it's a decodification of his experience of life and his way of seeing it. So the Skywalker story is somehow the Lucas story as he sees himself and his life, or that of his family or the people important to him. And in that sense, it truly is a product of sort of true mythology, because ancient mythology surely was derived from the daily experiences of the people who made up the stories or who constructed the stories or whatever. So, but they are, of course, less navigable by the user. And what I mean in this is that Hollywood has evolved a huge structure that works around this method of narrative, meaning that if the main actor has less baggage, if he is less snappy and doesn't have much of a character and doesn't say things at all during the movie. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we would start seeing movies in which the main actor isn't even present, he's the camera. But the less of a burden the main hero brings, the easier it is for the audience to jump in his shoes. For this very reason, all the stories are told more and more frequently with heroes who have no personality at all. They're just a physical bod, box in which you, as an audience, can jump into. So the less you say about his life before, the less you make him particular, the more you make this experience plausible and gratifying for who jumps into the experience with that in mind or in aim or as objective. So this is one problem with modern narrative that will never be the same after Star Wars, and that has ruined every sort of movie after, because, well, not that it has, but it's just you've seen it, and that you know how it works, and everybody's been using it for the last 20 to 30 years, and even more so in the last 10, so it's not really news. The way of doing these things is not news. The things that Star Wars 1, 2, 3 shown is not news because we've seen it a long, long time, for 30 years. And the derived stories that we could have told about Han and Leia have been put on hold because we all knew that eventually we'd come to 8, 7, and 9. So nobody dared invest too much into telling a story that they would eventually have to renounce totally as not having happened. Not all, which in narrative terms is, anyways. I think that's mostly it. But the fact that, no, it's not. What I meant to say is that, so the first 3 movies are incredibly based on this structure, and this for this very reason. Yes, they were 3 great movies. They were singular. They were exceptional, but they don't have the same usability from the user, the same freedom of interaction with the media, and the media is a narrative world, so it's almost like if it was in itself an MMO. Imagine it in this way, a multiplayer online game, where all the users, the audience, can interact in their own very special way. So while we've had the origins with the first 3 movies, they are not particularly pertinent to the notion of world building. They are much more pertinent to the notions of mythological theorycraft. And for such, they are very beautiful stories, which makes them good movies, but not particularly usable mythos. Not particularly, because compared to modern religion, it has demonstrated to be much more popular. What I mean to say is that the later 3 movies and the whole more Sith, more Jedi affair debacle is much more fruable as a world into which interact. And since once you've released something in general culture, it sort of belongs to everybody, and that culture is dynamic by definition and cannot be static. A Star Wars that is changed and affected and resonates to its fan base, its audience, is a better Star Wars than a Star Wars that is just imagined by one person. And since some of these stories are some of the, I'm not saying best stories of Star Wars, but knowing a lot of stories within Star Wars, there are some of these stories which are dear to me, but which not are dear to me. Well, some are dear to me, but they are dear to me because I found them very nice stories. And among these is Darth Revan, which you will find many people are also quite fond of. And explore it if you don't know why, but I suggest. What I'm trying to tell you is that everything that has been Star Wars culture in the last 15 years is, and that to my eyes is much more fun than the old Star Wars. I'm not saying that these are better movies, that the newer ones are better movies. The old Star Wars are the better movies. But as a fan and as a mythos into which interact and actually do something, because you can watch and you hope a lot of times, but there's very few things you can do with it and stories that you can tell about it, as we've said. There is a huge amount of stories and things to interact with about the Old Republic setting, and you can see it by the amount of cosplay and fan fiction that part has replayed, that is, I think, less vibrant and represented, for example, in the retro Star Wars scene, and I'm aware of Legion 501 and all of that. But I think that all that is Star Wars and that is interesting as a Star Wars fan, if you like the lore, a lot of it comes from the Old Republic stuff. I mean, the datacrons and the holocrons is an idea that was invented specifically in these venues. Raven was born in these venues. What else? The Rakata, so even this notion and the notion of, oh yes, the notion of Grey Jedi was explored in KOTOR 2, I think, which was also very cool, and that made it somehow with Queen Gon in the new movies. So this part of Star Wars has given a lot to Star Wars, and don't dismiss it, because if it probably represents, I'm not saying it surely does, but it probably represents most of the reasons why you'd like Star Wars today, and because they are more pertinent and more malleable to modern culture than the older ones are, which are older now and which are more specific and are much more catered towards cinema and are a cinematic product, while the newer movies are a much more a wider media, which goes and looks into a lot of arguments that a movie usually doesn't go into. So, and namely, this means that it provides material for games, comics, fan fiction, conventions and stuff, that creates a culture in itself, not a culture with capital C, but you get it. And that is all I want